Hi, I'm Storm Teammate Chief Meteorologist Steve Jervey here at WFLA in Tampa, and joining me is Alan Seals, well known from WKRG in Mobile, and Justin Kiefer, the Chief Meteorologist at WMBB in Panama City. We're going to get a brief overview at first because obviously Tampa is not in the center of this. So you gentlemen will be dealing with this perhaps a little bit more direct effects, especially Justin. I just want to give you an overview as to what the storm is doing, what it's done, and what the folks along the Gulf Coast could potentially expect. So first of all, let's take a look at our graphic if we could. We've got a great visible satellite. We'd say great scientifically because a well-formed storm will show a very clear eye. And we saw this, I saw this at 11 o'clock last night. The last few frames of the satellite was really starting to form a clearly defined eye. And the storm is actually up to 110-mile-per-hour winds, just shy of being a major hurricane at 111. That's been the forecast track. Amazingly, this storm has really dealt well with a lot of wind shear. We saw several days ago strong wind shear, and we thought that might limit it a little bit in terms of its growth. But right now, we're seeing very clearly defined outflow. You just saw the water vapor imagery. That shows drier air. We had colored in red on the western side of the system. But it's in a very good zone, high pressure aloft, and that allows the storm to ventilate. The high wispy clouds you see coming off of the system itself, that means the storm is very healthy in a good environment to grow. And we're talking about the Category 2 storm. I'll also make mention of those warm sea surface temperatures. This time of year, late September, early October, especially after the very hot year we had, warmest September on record. Here in Tampa Bay. In fact, guys, was it still officially the hottest month ever? Yes. Which is odd for the month of September, especially we had a lot of rainfall, so a highly unusual warm month. So the Gulf temperature is very warm. That condensation, the heat that's released from the condensation process is what drives the energy for these storms. So the forecast track is what Alan and Justin have been looking at very closely, obviously. A Category 3 storm here Tuesday at 8 p.m. with 120-mile-per-hour winds. Wednesday morning, 8 a.m., 125-mile-per-hour winds, and then forecast to move very close to the Panama City area. Potentially right now the track is for directly over that. Of course, these storms tend to wobble a little bit, but we've seen a very great consensus between both the American and the European model here the last 24 hours, as well as a consensus from the spaghetti models too. And really the past 2 days have been pretty solid on this track. I got to give the computer models credit. And the GFS credit as well, because that typically lags a little bit, the Euro. But in this case, the Euro kind of caught up with the GFS. And then very quickly, the storm will move rapidly off to the northeast, caught up in the fast upper level wind flow. And that's not unusual for a path of these types of storms when they get caught up in the upper level winds. The trough for us here in the Bay Area, Tampa Bay, is critical because this time of year, we have a history in late September, early October of seeing intense hurricanes. In fact, in 1848, we saw one in late October. That was probably the worst on record. That was a Category 4 storm. And then in 1921, in late September, we had a Category 3. Basically, these troughs come along and move these storms toward the west coast of Florida. In this case, the trough was a little bit lagging, so as a result, we didn't see that effect. But you can see that same kind of curving off to the east effect. Hurricane warnings, obviously, for Panama City. Go down to our coastline. Our local effects, we do have a tropical storm warning. I believe that's still for Citrus County. And Citrus County is the most northern county in our area. That's colored in red there where the name Inverness is located. Tropical storm watch along south of the bay, largely coastal effects. We've seen some decent breezes here and of course some stronger wind gusts. We could see those at 30 miles per hour plus. We actually saw those yesterday. And we'll watch our wind direction locally change with the movement of this storm as it moves to the north and off to the northeast. You can see that wind switch with more of an onshore flow here, St. Petersburg, Sarasota. These areas we'll see. And we've been also dealing with, you probably heard about red tide. It's an algae bloom and that's not going to be good for us, especially if we see a persistent onshore flow to move that toward the beaches where so many of our tourist dollars live. These are at the high end for the storm surge, 4 to 6 feet for those northern counties. Probably won't get that much, but we'll have to watch the high tides along coastal spots. But those are the local effects. So that's a rough look at what the storm is doing here locally and of course broadly. I guess we'll take a look at, we'll talk to Alan Seals right now at WKRG in Mobile. Alan is in a different circumstance on the western side of the system, and that causes different kind of complications with an offshore. But that for Alan, I know his big concern is storm surge, as many along the Gulf Coast have that same concern. Alan?
That's correct, and keep in mind the area I'm in, WKRG area, we cover a few counties in Mississippi, Mobile Bay, which is Mobile and Baldwin counties, and then we cover 4 counties going into the Florida Panhandle. The way this is looking for us, the system is going to our east, meaning, as Steve just said, we get that north flow of air coming from land heading out into the Gulf of Mexico. The system, which is likely to become a Category 3, still is going to have a punch. Now keep in mind, my perspective goes back to Hurricane Ivan, which hit South Baldwin County as a Category 3. My perspective goes back to Hurricane Dennis, which hit Pensacola Beach as a Category 3. This one is projected to come in as a Category 3, but that category doesn't tell you the whole story. It is just a wind measurement. It doesn't tell you about rain, it doesn't tell you necessarily directly about storm surge, and it doesn't tell you about the threat of tornado. So one thing to keep in mind, you're hearing this is likely to make landfall 24 hours from now as a Category 3. That could be winds of anywhere from 111 to 129. If the winds go to 110 miles an hour, then it's a Category 2. And my message to folks is don't focus so much on the category. Look at all the things that can happen as a storm makes landfall. So these are wind projections late tonight going into tomorrow. Again, this area outlined is where the WKRG focus is. Landfall is likely closer to Panama City, Apalachicola, maybe near Destin. But as we go through the night, our winds start to pick up out of the north. So in other words, in Mobile Bay, we saw this with Hurricane Maria. Winds will be blown out of the bay, and people are amazed to see how shallow bays are once you get a steady north wind. So that's going to happen. Also along our barrier islands, our coastal peninsulas, even though you won't have an onshore wind producing storm surge from the Gulf, you'll have an offshore wind producing storm surge from the part of the water that's on the north side of the land. So those are considerations across the Florida Panhandle. Notice by tomorrow morning, winds still onshore 20, 30 miles an hour below tropical storm strength. But then once we get to tomorrow afternoon, you see these winds closer to Apalachicola and Panama City up to 60, 70 miles an hour. So hurricane force winds during the afternoon, and then later in the afternoon, if you sort of connect these circles, it shows you where this is projected to go. The center of the storm, somewhere here near the coastline. Most of my area, the WKRG area, a drier north wind. Not that we won't get any rain, but in the main picture, the big picture, most of the folks who watch me on Channel 5 in Mobile, they're not going to see the worst part of the storm. By no means will you see that. Once you get into Florida Panhandle, though, there is that possibility. So my message for everyone, don't focus on the category. You will get through this if you take the steps to prepare. You follow your local instructions. If you're told to evacuate, especially for storm surge, you'd better do it. You cannot fight moving water. Evacuation out of a storm surge zone simply means getting out of the zone. You don't have to drive 200 miles away. And if you are in the Panhandle and you're wondering which way to go, you don't want to go in the direction the storm is going. You don't want to go north. You would rather go west or northwest into southern Alabama or central Alabama to get right out of the path of the potential worst part of the storm.
And you have a lot of experience, obviously, on the Gulf Coast and dealing with these storms for many years. That old saying, it's like you run from water and hide from wind. If you do live in an evacuation zone, just get out. Listen to local emergency managers and the advice that they're giving you. They know best. Most folks I see after the storm that say, I wish I would have left. That's always the story from people that stayed and tried to deal with that storm surge. And in many cases we've seen have just lost their lives by not heeding that advice and taking those evacuation orders. Now we're going to hear from Justin. Justin at WMBB in Panama City. It's kind of the star of the show here. And tell us about some of the local effects you can expect.
Thank you, Steve. Unfortunately, that may be the case. It looks like, for all intents and purposes, the center of this storm is going to move to our coastline. You know, I've always tried to reinforce with all of us here and whoever would listen, you know, a hurricane is not a dot. It's not just a point. And this storm spreads out for hundreds of miles, maybe not hurricane spread out, but it's going to affect hundreds of miles, which essentially encapsulates the entire Gulf Coast region of North Florida. And then up into South Alabama and into Southwest Georgia. So we are, you know, here's a look right now. This is where our TV station is located. We are very close to one of our bays. Our county is Bay County because it is essentially a giant bay kind of surrounded by a little bit of land. But what I wanted to do here is kind of give you a little pan and show you that at this time, while there's a little bit of a breeze and some cloud cover, things are fairly tranquil. But the good news here, the streets are just about empty. The folks here in Panama City and across Bay County have really heeded the evacuation notices, and the folks that are in these coastal zones, zones A, B, and C, which is a good chunk of our county, have taken heed of the evacuation orders. I'm looking essentially southwestward. That is Panama City Beach, and you are looking out there toward where the beach is already roiled up. In fact, let me show you one picture right now. This is of a live webcam, and it's out toward Panama City Beach, and it will show you the surf that's already up. The storm surge, if you will, has already come up. This is a streaming webcam, so it's going to be a little bit stuttery here, but these pictures are not old. These are pretty fresh. There's a big break out at the second sandbar. We're seeing probably 8-foot breakers out there, and the surf already making its way up about halfway up the beach on the sandy beach. Good portion of our bay and our land that surrounds the bay is only about 7 foot above flood stage, and there's lots of homes built in that kind of zone that are about 7 to 8 feet. For historical purposes, if you will, the Hurricane Opal and Dennis produced about a 7-foot storm surge in our bay. Panama City is right in the middle of this map here. So as you see, there's a funneling effect to our east, Apalachicola, Caribel, in Franklin County, then over toward the Tallahassee television market, St. Mark's, Taylor, Dixie County, and on down toward Citrus County. Those storm surge numbers are an estimate, but that water can funnel in. And as Alan had alluded to just a few years ago, not every storm is the same. There have been small hurricanes by wind standards that have produced 9-foot storm surge at St. Mark's because of a persistent wind funneling into the Appalachian Bay. So that is a huge concern. And we're already seeing water up just a little bit along the beaches. For Walton County, Bay County, and Gulf counties, stretches from Destin through Panama City down toward Mexico Beach and Port St. Joe, there is potential 6 to 9 foot. And like I said, sort of the benchmark at the Panama City Marina, which is in that first video that I showed you from our tower cam, the highest level there is over 7 foot during Hurricane Opal, was last week 23 years ago. So that's sort of the benchmark we're looking at across North Florida. Now, again, the hurricane warnings, for those of you, obviously, we're completely in a warned area. And this also includes the wiregrass of southeast Alabama, Dothan, and in southwest Georgia, from Albany down to Bainbridge and Thomasville. So inland counties, inland zones of Georgia and Alabama also sitting in a hurricane warning. That means the hurricane conditions could be expected there within about 36 hours. The timestamp on that graphic, so this expires Monday 10 a.m., don't really pay attention to that. They have to give an endpoint, so the graphic has at least some expiration date. But what we're looking at is the potential for the hurricane conditions to be into that area of southwest Georgia and southeast Alabama. I understand perhaps there's a little bit of an issue with my audio. If that's still the case, let's head back to Steve and have him pick it up from here.
You're right, Justin. You're just popping in and out there. We'll get that worked out, no doubt. You made some good points, and local points especially, because this is what it's going to be all about in that area. Just to the east of the area of landfall, obviously that's where you see the stronger winds. Factor in the movement of the storm, the advancing speed of that storm on the eastern side, and of course the water effects, as you showed, 9 to 12 feet on that eastern side of the landfall. That's the big concern. And there's so many local effects. Many people, we always say in the Tampa Bay area here and along the Gulf Coast, live just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet above sea level. So any kind of change in sea level is significant, and that's what the folks will be dealing with. You have rivers, you have inlets, you have inland waterways, and sometimes these rivers go all the way up into the inland areas, and those areas can be affected as well by storm surge. That water effect, that saltwater effect in particular, is so brutal along coastal areas. And the bigger the geographic size of a storm that you have, obviously the greater effects. We're going to look at some of the reports from, what are we going to look at first here, guys? Let's pull out the camera if we could, guys, and take a look. I wanted to show you some of the reports from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. They've been flying through here today, and I think we did get a wind speed of 105 miles per hour. Of course, this is at flight level, but nonetheless, you get the idea that as these They continue to sample these areas, both with the P-3 plane that flies out of Lakeland, Florida, and also we're getting the G4 jet that flies at the higher elevation. And this way you get a good three-dimensional look at the storm and the wind speed and the growth by dropping these sondes in and measuring what's going on inside the storm. This graphic shows the tropical storm force winds, which includes a wide swath that goes all the way over to Allen in Mobile and some of his viewing area that goes into Florida, and also Panama City, obviously, that is at the heart of the forecast. As we move that forward, the hurricane force winds are that red area there of potential 74-mile-per-hour winds. To the east of there, that's where the stronger winds would be. As I mentioned, factoring in the advance of the storm, and of course the water effects would be greatest there with the onshore flow in that counterclockwise wind coming more, pushing it offshore to the south, as Alan was talking about. Moving into the southwestern part of Georgia, eventually with rain. As we mentioned, the fast forward speed of the storm at that point, with the fast upper level winds essentially guiding the storm. They act as rivers of air to kind of guide and move these storms along, and then moving quickly off toward North Carolina, where we hope it doesn't linger, as they've had a rough year this year. Storm surge potential, as you were just seeing from the graphic there, 8 to 12 feet within the Big Bend area here. We talk about the depth of the water, as well as the water just being pushed into these regions. We saw in 1993 here with the no-name storm, a storm that came outside of hurricane season that produced 8, 9, 10 feet of storm surge outside of hurricane season. So we know this because of the depth of the water, and of course with a large storm that can whip up a pretty good storm surge, this is just a vulnerable area for water with just nowhere for it to go. So all the areas that I had mentioned previously, the inland waterways that are susceptible to a high storm surge, those are all out of concern. Temperatures, sea surface temperatures are warm in this area, 83, 84 degrees. This all sustains tropical activity. 80 degrees is considered roughly to be the temperature where it actually can sustain tropical storms, hurricanes obviously. So there's plenty of fuel for these systems. And also these are the wave heights. This is using a Barron computer. And is this the BAMS model or is this the Euro? Yes, okay, there. It's written right there. Tropical wave heights, as you see here, 30 feet. And you just move this ashore, basically, and these are where your issues come up with storm surge, needless to say. And the longer a storm is out there, the more intense it becomes, the larger the storm geographically from east to west. That creates the bigger storm surge concern. And then, of course, the onshore flow. And you factor in places like Tallahassee and the southwestern sections of Georgia. Their big concerns, obviously, are rain over an extended period of time and high winds, strong wind gusts that can cause that damage with a potential major hurricane making landfall in and around this area. For us in the Bay Area, of course, the onshore flow, and you've heard all about our local effects with red tide. Now, forecast rainfall. This is speaking for just us here in Florida. This won't be probably as significant of an effect as it will be within that swath of the area we mentioned from Panama City all the way up into sections of Georgia and the Carolinas, but especially right along the coastline points east of there. That's where the rain really could pile up. This is basically a computer model forecast. So those are some of the local effects. Alan, you've been listening to what we've been saying here. I know you've been doing and forecasting weather for a long period of time. Anything you want to add? I know you've got a great perspective of life along the Gulf Coast for many years.
We sure have, and even this hurricane season here in the Mobile area, we had Alberto, we had Gordon, and first of all, never underestimate a system, whether it's a tropical storm or a hurricane. With Tropical Storm Gordon, when it came through pretty recently, we had one person lose their life because a tree fell on a mobile home, even though we did not have extreme winds. But keep that in mind, even though it's a nice quiet day in downtown Mobile right now, hurricanes, tropical storms, they are not perfect circles. Steve did a great job of showing you where the hurricane force winds are located, which is a fairly limited part of the storm. So here's what we're looking at along the coast right now. It's a breezy day for the north central Gulf Coast. The heavy, steady rain bands are still offshore. The radar can't see all the rain, literally, because it's just too far away. Some folks were posting questions about what can you expect in central Florida. Well, as this system heads toward the Panhandle, you'll be on the east side of the storm, and that means you could get in those feeder bands, those bands of rain that wrap around into a tropical storm and hurricane, and those are where you have that risk of seeing an isolated tornado. Along the beaches of the Gulf Coast, double red flags are flying, which means do not get in the water. People, I know you can't see this, but I'm watching people on the edge of the water taking pictures. That's where you want to be. Surfers will try to get out there, but even then, it's not a safe thing to do. we see people lose more lives from rip currents on the Gulf Coast than we do from lightning and from tornadoes and even flash floods. It's that dangerous. Water, when it's moving, has extreme power. And you're told not to get in the water. My analogy is you go to the zoo, you see the sign that says, do not get in the cage with the animal. Even if the animal's down there sleeping, you don't want to mess around with it. On our coastline, mid-80s, very humid, and east wind, which we'll be picking up later tonight. So through tonight, for most of the northern Gulf Coast, wind is not an issue. People still have time to prepare their property. And along the coast, preparation is your boat, your dock, your pier. If you live in a mobile home that is anchored to the ground with straps, and you are in the Panhandle, you need to think about spending the night with, or spending the late night and tomorrow with someone in a permanent home who's not in a flood zone. So again, mobile homes, even though they're stronger than they used to be, just the fact that many are raised above the ground lets the wind get underneath, and then it becomes a box that can blow around in the wind. Tomorrow morning, most of us still have a quiet start to the day. That's the point, though, where winds start to pick up closer to Panama City, Apalachicola, through the day going to hurricane force winds. And this is just a computer model. So 2 points on this. Number one, it is incredible that we knew any of this was possible. It's all due to data, research, technology, and people studying the history of weather. But it'll never be 100% perfect. And that means all these projections can easily be off by miles per hour or by distance. And you've got to plan for that uncertainty, the what-if scenario. Don't take the risk. Don't take the chance of saying, oh, I live here, and the wind 2 miles away is going to be that. We don't know. Again, just go back to feeder bands with tropical storms. You get underneath those feeder bands, you can get intense rain, you can get tornadoes. Even if no one else gets wind, one little swath within a subdivision can get damaged from a tornado moving through a feeder band. So keep that in mind. Storm surge watch, as we showed you earlier, the warning is basically from Choctawhatchee Bay to the east. That's where you are almost certain to have that strong onshore wind. The watch covers Pensacola toward Destin, where it's all dependent upon where the storm makes landfall and how strong the wind is going to be around it. This storm, another important distinction, if it comes in as a Category 3, which Dennis did, Dennis was a very compact storm. Ivan hit as a Category 3, but remember what made Ivan unique? It was a Category 5 in the Gulf of Mexico, and as it approached the coastline, it weakened to a Category 3. We're watching a storm approaching that is a Category 2, likely strengthening. So again, you can't just say, well, that was a 3, this is a 3. The same thing's going to happen. We just don't know. Quiet in Mobile. Most of Mobile is not going to get much rain, but Panama City, Apalachicola, Tallahassee, Albany, Georgia, Dothan, Alabama, 6, 7, 8 inches of rain, maybe up to a foot. And even though we all remember Florence very vividly, Florence was a storm that stalled. This thing is not going to stall. It's going to keep on moving. So that will limit how much rain falls. It also limits how long it's going to last. By Thursday, sunshine, but cleanup after the storm.
Well, thanks, Alan. Excellent perspective, and Nexstar is very fortunate to have you and so many other great meteorologists with so much experience along the Gulf Coast and dealing with tropical weather for decades, literally, and giving us that perspective because there's so many effects, and as Alan mentioned, each one of these storms is unique. You can't just plug in and say, well, this was a Category 3. You can look at the damage from another storm, but each one approaches differently. It builds up a different kind of storm surge. It's a different geographic size, so all that is all different factors. I want to go back to Justin one more time here before we wrap up for any final thoughts, and hope you got your microphone worked out there, Justin. Anything you want to add to the folks, and especially in folks in Panama City area?
Well, I do, and I really appreciate it. Hopefully the microphone issues are correct, and if not, just jump in and say, hey, we can't hear you. You know, we kind of live our life along the Gulf Coast really with the benchmarks of hurricanes, it seems like, whether it was Camille in 69 or Eloise, which struck here in 75, 85 with Kate and Elena, 95 with Opal, 2005 with Dennis, or 04 with Ivan. Every storm different. All hurricanes, but all different storms, and all had different effects on the Panhandle. This one will be completely different than anything we've seen before. It may be worse, it may not, but the thing about it is, don't take it for granted that, oh, well, we sat it out through Opal and it was fine. Well, Opal hit several, almost 100 miles down the coast. We had significant damage here in Panama City. Those are things you definitely have to take into consideration, and the inland impact as well. Our friends up in Mariana and Chipley, up toward Bonifay, and up in southeast Alabama around Dothan, or in Donaldsonville or Colquitt in southwest Georgia, all going to feel some really nasty effects out of a Michael as it comes ashore. And for the good folks here in Panama City and Bay County and Lynn Haven and Callaway, Springfield, out toward Panama City Beach, we'll feel the full effects of this probably starting as early as tomorrow morning at daybreak, and we'll see what's coming on in. But again, the reminder, no two storms are alike, and this one will bring its own set of circumstances that at this time look to be on the major side. But we're here fully staffed and ready to cover it. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about it today.
All right, Justin, really appreciate your perspective. Both of you guys, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be thinking about you. And of course, crews will be rushing to help you out as you get through this event. You will get through it, and we'll try to offer whatever we can to make your life a little bit easier. But just as they say, hunker down in this area, run from water and hide from wind. That's always the best advice. With evacuation, I want to make a quick point. A lot of people say, well, we have to evacuate. It's like, well, if you don't have to go to Birmingham, if you're in Mobile or if you're in Panama City, all you have to do is go maybe a couple of miles inland to a friend's house that's not in an evacuation zone. Ideally, people don't get too far and get stuck on highways. That's always the best advice. I want to quickly come back to us and introduce my team, meteorologist Ian Oliver, as well as meteorologist Julie Phillips here on the storm team. They really work great. They're good, hard workers, and we've been through just Irma last year, which was a great learning experience for all of us. Anything you guys want to add?
Just sometimes as simple as eyeball tests, what we've seen via satellite just since yesterday. The forecast was for an intensifying hurricane, and you look at the visible satellite this afternoon, it's exactly what we've seen. A well-defined inner core, eyes starting to clear out, a symmetrical system, letting us know that the shear that had been hampering this just a little bit is now really starting to lessen. You pointed out the warm sea surface temperatures, a lower wind shear environment. Essentially in the short term, there's nothing to weaken the storm, unfortunately, until it makes a landfall in the Panhandle.
Yeah, some people were asking, could it make a turn? But this is a storm we have very high certainty level with the track. It's been pretty consistent, so we're pretty certain of where this storm is going, but it's so important, like they said, the individuality of every storm. A lot of people say, well, it was fine in this one, or this one did that, and every storm is different, and every storm brings different impacts to different localized areas. So your local meteorologist is going to have the best perspective for terms of what kind of winds you'll see, what kind of rain, storm surge. All of that is so dependent upon where you're located, and like you said, how the storm approaches, how quickly it builds, is it weakening, strengthening. So every storm is very different, and we hope the storm moves in and moves out very quickly, which it does look to do.
In 2005, we saw with Katrina pushing some 29 feet of water in. That was the worst storm. I did a story that we went back there and did some research on it, and that was the worst storm since there's a cottage that Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, lived in until his death. It's a Louisiana raised cottage there right on the beach in Biloxi, and that was the worst storm since that thing was built in like the 1850s, and it weathered all those storms, like 19 hurricanes that had come in, and Katrina had come in with that storm surge of 29 feet and virtually destroyed the place. So the Gulf is a very dangerous place because for so many reasons, as we've outlined, and the local effects especially, of which you've heard from both Alan and of course Justin. This is a serious storm. It'll continue to strengthen. We'll feel the effects. We'll get through it, obviously. And I think storm surges are a big concern, obviously, but winds as well. So as we say so long to the Nexstar station, for meteorologist Ian Oliver and for Julie Phillips, and of course for Alan Seals and for Justin Kiefer, we'll be thinking of both of you. Justin, you especially. I hope you can communicate to your viewers everything you need to communicate to keep them safe and to keep your station at the top in providing the best information to your viewers, because at this time, as we know, people are hyper aware. They're extremely scared and dangerous, and in, unfortunately, large cases, uninformed. A lot of folks don't think about it until it's sitting right off coast. So for all of us, thanks to the Nexstar Nation for joining us here this afternoon, and have a great afternoon. And Justin, we're thinking of you and all the viewers in the Panama City and Gulf Coast area.